a storm. He could argue with a fence post until the fence post gave up. Yeah, those are the kind of things that were said about me when I was a kid. Like since I was 7, I've been lecturing my stuffed animals. But let me just tell you, talking a lot and conversation, they're not the same thing. That's what I'm going to talk about in this episode of Leading Leaders. Stay tuned.
Think storytelling's just for bedtime? Nah, it's the secret sauce for business magic. Stuck in a rut with bland pitches and yawning clients? Enter Boost Your Business with Story Power. 6 weeks of epic storytelling training. It's like leveling up in a video game but for your career. Master the art of narrative and watch connections blossom like a viral TikTok. Simple, impactful, and game-changing. Ready to transform your biz vibes? Dive in now and make storytelling your superpower.
Subscribe now for access to our extensive media library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. Begin your personal growth plan at storypoweracademy.com for leadership development and communication skills training.
I'm J. Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. I can tell you that the gift of gab was one of my natural gifts. I can also tell you that just because you have the gift of gab doesn't necessarily mean that you're a great conversationalist. I know a lot of people that love to talk and hate to listen. The result of that is it's always a one-sided conversation. There's nothing good to come of it. It turns into a lecture. Ask me how I know. I used to do it a lot. You would think that having the gift of gab would mean you're automatically good at sales. Well, I do know a lot of people who talk themselves out of sales and not into sales. Not because they don't like to talk, not because they're not good at talking, but because the words they choose to say don't benefit the process. See, just because you know how to talk or you like to talk or you love to talk, you're wonderful at talking, you have lots of words that come out of your mouth, doesn't mean that any of them lead someone to a buying conclusion. Now, of our 4 children, we have one who's gone from nursing into professional nursing education. That's her job. She talks a lot. They pay her to fly around the country to talk. She's not necessarily an egregiously extroverted person, but she's really, really close. In fact, from the time that she was a little kid, I used to say, her mouth is those little rubber super balls that you drop it once and it bounces 50 times. Her lips are made of that. Once she starts talking, she doesn't stop. In fact, if she didn't eat with her mouth full, she'd starve to death. The fact that she's always had lots of words to say and that she has a giant brain and she has a lot of intellect behind what she has to say has become an advantage in her professional career. But it also took that skill and that discipline of the balance of learning and adding knowledge and wisdom and experience, or as we teach in Story Power, the 7 C's, the context, the credential, the clarity, the credibility. You've got to be able to put all of those things into what you say to other people, or they don't matter. 2 of our 4 children are in sales, one in retail sales and management, and the other one is the sales lead and manager of another company. Their ability to communicate has always been important. Our youngest daughter was 14 when she graduated from the Dale Carnegie course. Why? Because we value communication, not just talking. Public speaking is very important. It's my career. But training people to be conversationalists is as much about listening, observing, awareness, knowing what's going on around you, testing your material before you put it out there into the crowd, taking that idea for a walk in a small environment, so before you throw it out there in front of thousands of people, you know if it's going to land or not. And if you don't test what you have to say, you just always speak from the cuff, the odds that you're going to offend somebody go way up. The odds that you're not going to connect with the decision makers that you need to connect with, they go way down. You're not going to have a chance to close a sale, gain the buy-in, make a difference in a movement, get people to do the things that you want them to do if you can't communicate with them, if you can't have a conversation with them. Now, you will find that most leaders are brilliant conversationalists. Let me say that more clearly. Most people who work on the skill and the discipline of brilliant communication, brilliant conversation, become leaders. Not necessarily that they set out to be leaders, but the more effort, the more intention, the more discipline you put into being a great conversationalist, the more likely your ideas are going to rise to the top in a common field. The more likely people are going to turn to you as a persuasive influencer, as someone who can get the point across, who can get the deal done. People love to collaborate with brilliant conversationalists. Now, the challenge with brilliant conversation is these things have very much gotten in the way. There are a lot of people who can't carry on a conversation face to face for anything. They're terrified. If they can't send it in a text, I know people who will argue with each other sitting in the same room, and they'll do it via text. Sometimes they'll talk to their device and have their device send the text. What? What about spell check? Yeah, that's part of the reason they do it, because they can't spell basic words, because they don't write anymore. They also miss ideas, and they use words that have nothing to do with the conversation. They just sounded big and eloquent or elegant. Which one is it? The challenge with conversation is, for some people it comes natural to talk. For some people it comes natural, like my wife, to listen. You got to squeeze her really hard to get her to respond, to get her to reply, to really get that conversation going. She's got to get to know you quite well. She's unlikely to meet an absolute stranger and just strike up a conversation. It happens from time to time, but it's not her norm. What does that mean? Well, conversation with her takes a little more effort. We've been working for years for her conversation skills to get better and better and better. She's a phenomenal listener. She's a great thinker, but she doesn't always want to reply. Conversation is a two-way street. There are times that I run into people at random, out of nowhere. We'll find something very small to talk about that we have in common that's obvious. And within a matter of minutes, we know more about them than you can imagine. Last night, we went out for my wife's birthday dinner. We sat down at a restaurant, and for whatever reason, with 75 empty tables, everyone that was seated in the restaurant was seated in a straight little row with tables right next to each other. I mean, we could have reached out and touched each other's water glasses. We were that close. With all the other empty tables, I'm not sure why that was the case, but that's the way they chose to do it. Well, during the course of our meal, the table next to us, they had a 3-year-old. And she decided it was time to go to the little girl's room. And so she ran off without her shoes on. And Mom was like, no, don't go in there without shoes on. No, please don't. And so she brought her back to the table, put her shoes on, and we all laughed about the fact that that's typical. She said everywhere she goes, she takes her shoes off. Within a course of about 20 minutes, we had her husband's entire business plan. I was giving him business cards and phone numbers and saying, let me connect you with this person and that person and this person who can help you to grow your business from where it is to where you want it to go, because I know some people in that industry. I know some people in that field. And it all started over a little girl who wouldn't wear her shoes. See, conversation isn't always diving off into the deep end. It's often just noticing what's going on around you. There's a great book by Andy Andrews called The Noticer. And he just talks about the power of observation. See, here's the hard part of that kind of conversation. It takes the humility to say, for this moment, what's going on in somebody else's world is more important than what's going on in mine. That's probably the hardest part of conversation, especially for someone who has a gift of gab, or someone who feels like every objective in life is to grow my business. And that's it. That's all I do is I grow my business. Now, there are people who can only talk about their business because nothing else in their life has energy in it, or everything else in their life is depressing, or they're living in that cycle of desperation that they feel like, if I'm not closing business and if I'm not gaining a sale, if I'm not putting money in the bank, then I'm losing. I've got to get more customers. I've got to sell my business. I've got to close the deal. Every conversation starts and ends with an elevator pitch. Well, that's not necessarily the case. And obviously, not everybody wants to hear your elevator pitch. I didn't even mention the name of my business or what we do until we were 15 minutes into the conversation talking about his business and what they do. And as I mentioned, that as we'd already decided we're all walking out, we'd said our hellos and our goodbyes, we'd shaken hands, we were walking out the door, and then he said, "Tell me a little more about you." And so I answered the question. And he shook my hand again and he said, "I would love to have lunch with you sometime." Great. Now we have a relationship built on a conversation that was focused on his wants, needs, and desires, and not mine. Dale Carnegie said it over 100 years ago. Always speak in the terms of the other person's interest. Look, if I've got something to offer him, I will. I'm not going to hold back from him if I feel like what I can do is make his life better. But sometimes just being concerned. Oh, we went to another place and saw a guy with a bunch of children, all girls. And I was watching memes on my Facebook and I saw this picture of, this is what I thought it was going to be like to have daughters. And it's the little girl in the swing and the flowers, and you've probably seen it. And in the next scene, it's every little girl who's would have one time been called a tomboy, rolling around in the mud and chasing the dog and soaking everything in water. And yeah, I had both of those girls. Granddaughters, just the same. And when I showed him the meme, I'm like, I know I don't know you. I've never seen your face before. You don't know me. But I saw you with your 4 girls and I saw this video and I thought, this is a perfect example. That strange encounter turned into a 10-minute conversation. And when he and his daughters walked out, you would have thought we'd known each other for 10 years. Why? Because we took an interest, we had a conversation, not a lecture, not an elevator pitch, not a sales pitch, just a conversation. And you know what the most powerful tool in conversations is? I bet you can guess, because I talk about it all the time. I never stop talking about it. Stories. Stories have power. The power to change your life, the power to transform your life, the power to transform your conversations. Sometimes just the ability to hear a story and pull out of that story the various elements. See, here's the beautiful thing about constructing stories. I teach people, select great stories. There's a parameter around selecting great stories. Are there several stories you've lived through in your life? Yes, thousands. Thousands upon thousands of stories. People think, well, I gotta have a shark bite story, like half my body is gone, or I climbed Mount Everest, or I went to the moon and back. Yeah, those are good meta-narratives all by themselves, but it's those micro stories, those little incidences where you find commonality, like the 3-year-old who didn't want to put her shoes on. It's common ground. That's know, like, and trust. I know something about you. You have a kid who doesn't like to put their shoes on. I have a handful of kids who don't like to put their shoes on, or they take them off as quickly as they can. That's common ground. We have something in common. I know that about you, you know that about me. Now we have similarity, we have like. I trust something about you. It's something about when a little kid realizes you have little kids, that you know how to treat them with respect and honor, you know how to acknowledge them, you know how to adore them without being a creep. That little girl was giving me high fives before we left. 20 minutes. And I'm talking to her parents the whole time, not even talking to her. Why does that happen? Because there's no like and trust. Because we found our common ground. That's where stories fit in. But see, here's the powerful thing about being able to craft a story, is that you know how to reverse engineer the understanding of the other storyteller. Let me say that again. This is important. This is very important. When you're in a conversation, if you've mastered the art of crafting great stories, you have the ability to deconstruct them and find all the deeper meaning in a really short story. When somebody tells you that story, now maybe they didn't craft it well, but the elements that they did mention, the things that they did say, the things that they intentionally left out, they all become very obvious when you're a skilled story crafter. You hear those things and you're like, I wonder, out of all the thousands of things in their life, did they choose to tell me that story? Because I know why I would have told that story. See how powerful this story power thing is? And I know that I would have said these words and I would have left, I would have left that out, because that doesn't contribute. But there's a reason that they included it. Maybe it's just that they're not a skilled storyteller. That's one reason. That could be a reason. Maybe it's because the priority in their mind of what that story represents, the meaning that it has, the meaning that they've given it, is completely different than what you would have given it meaning to be. That's another level of conversation. That's another deepening of understanding that you can't get in a text message. The body language, the tonality, the facial expressions, all of the things that go into crafting and telling that story. This is a read-write process. You're learning about them as much as you're telling them about you. That's the power of a story in a conversation. Now, I love to pick up old books. If you watch this podcast for any length of time, yes, we're in our 10th season. Episode 1758 is today. I love to pick up old books, and I picked up this book. It's called The Art of Conversation. This book was written in 1936. This is the 6th print, and it says the 23rd thousand. So over 23,000 copies of this book were sold in 1936, for what it's worth. I did do the math, because inside the cover, it says this book sold for $2.50 in 1936. That was a chunk of change. I mean, let me just give you an idea how much of a chunk of change that is. If you sold 23,000 copies of this book in today's money, that's $1,174,000. The 23,000 copies that he sold at $2.50. That's pretty significant. So I'm going to jump over here to page 186 because, I like to jump around. Jump around. He's talking about the power of storytelling. On page 186, he says, people who collect stories for use in conversation and for use in public speaking too, have seemed to come to the conclusion that there's only one kind of story, the humorous story. The result is that usually the humor story is the only kind that is well told. If you were taking notes, I'd say underline and circle that. The humorous story is the only one that's well told. Why? Because that's the one that gets the most practice. People who go through the Story Power training, the 6 weeks class, the retreat, the Story Power Master class online, I emphasize again and again and again, don't just craft the story once. Rehearse it over and over and over when you're by yourself so that it's comfortable in your head. And then rehearse it in different environments. Sit in a different place and read the same story to yourself and see if emotionally you feel the same. Chances are you won't. So what he's saying here, 90 years ago, is that the only story people rehearse, the only story people practice regularly is the humorous one. They feel like if it can't be funny. Now, I can also tell you in the previous chapter, I almost gave up on this book because he's talking about stories and they're basically just one-liner jokes. I'm like, that's not a story. I mean, it's a joke. It's a joke at somebody else's expense based on what he created here, but let's go deeper. So he says, the fact of the matter is that stories are being told all the time, stories that appeal to all sorts of emotions, instincts, stories that should arouse pity and admiration and wonder and sympathy and anger and awe and pride and patriotism. It's almost impossible to carry on a conversation of any length without telling stories, either real or imaginative. Yet no pains have been taken to acquire to any degree of skill in the telling of stories because we seem to have forgotten there are stories other than funny ones. We must have stories in any conversation in order to carry it forward. People cannot discuss abstract ideas for a considerable time without becoming wearied. They must have narratives, recitals of what people said or did. And, of course, just any story won't do. It must be the right kind of story. And it must be told in the right way. Where have I heard that? Oh, yeah. Story power, empowering influence. We help leaders tell better stories better. It must be the right kind of story, a better story, and it must be told in the right way. Tell better stories better. This is not a new idea. He said this 90 years ago. He, by the way, is Milton Wright. Then he says, to justify the use of a story as part of a conversation, it must have 3 qualities. If you've been through any of the Story Power training, you know that we have the 3 E's, which we got from Dale Carnegie. We have ROAR, which was a revelation of my own. It must be relevant, have ownership, speak with authority, and be responsible for how people feel when you're done. But when you go through the Story Power Retreat, you get an entire grid that has like 16 columns to qualify a story. So if you select a story, then you go, have I earned the right to tell it? Have I told it with enthusiasm? Am I eager to tell it to other people? Is it relevant? Does it have ownership? Does it have authority? Can it be responsible for how it feels? Does it meet all 7 of the 7 C's? What about the 4 I's? If you don't know what those things are, get in the Story Power Retreat and you'll figure it out. And if you attend, only if you attend the Story Power Retreat, will you get the Story Power Grid. The Story Power Grid is a spreadsheet designed to track all of these qualifications of a story so that you can go, ooh, that's going to be a good story. Then it also helps you align each story with a given audience and a given call to action. So you can figure out exactly how you can use that story in a conversation. Here's what he says. To justify the use of a story as part of a conversation, it must have 3 qualities. Number 1, it must be interesting. There's an idea. It must be interesting. Planes, trains, and automobiles. He says, the next time you're going to tell one of these little anecdotes, do me a favor. Have a point. It makes it so much more interesting for the listener. It must be interesting. It must be relevant. There you go. First letter in ROAR. Got to be relevant. What does it mean to be relevant? Well, we live in an information age, post-information age. Now we live in a data negotiation age. I don't even know what you call this age. But in the information age, everybody has access to information, and it may or may not be relevant. I can throw data and stats and facts at you all day long, and if they're not relevant, that's not a conversation. And number 3, it must be pointed. It must be pointed. I want you to understand that if you're going to be a leader, you've got to be skilled in communication. You've got to be skilled in conversation. And just because you can speak publicly, just because you can speak off the cuff, just because you can generate ideas in a moment's notice, all of those things are great, and they're great natural gifts and maybe even skilled. But I'm going to tell you, if you don't have the discipline to know when to, that word that parents often tell their kids don't say, if you don't know when to shut up and listen, you're not a conversationalist. And if you want to be a better leader, if you want to grow your business, if you want to know how to network in a networking environment, if you want to know how to build relationships off the fly, if you want to know how to engage with people that you've never met before in a way that leads to something lasting, learn the skill of conversation. Not just communication, but conversation. And if you engage in the Story Power training that we offer, the 6 weeks class, the retreat, the Story Power Masterclass, one-on-one coaching, any one of those, what you're going to find is the training process at the highest level is less regimented than you can imagine. Why? Because the power of conversation is a training tool and a coaching tool. It is the ability to read and write in the process, to tell a story that makes a purposeful impact and leads to a conclusion that I don't have to give you. When I can tell you a story and you glean from it and you go, oh, yeah. And now you have buy-in and you have ownership, and I didn't give you the idea. I just led you in the direction. You made the decision, the conclusion on your own. Now you own it. I don't. I'm not trying to persuade you or convince you or convict you or manipulate you. I'm just laying out there what actually happened in my world, what I discovered along the way. And hey, if that's of value to you, if that could save you some pain or get you to your goal faster, then take that. Go with it. My call to action is always pretty simple. Now that you know, what are you going to do? Go do something about it. Story Power Retreat is coming up. You really ought to take a good look at being a part of that. It's extremely affordable by comparison to anything else that you would do. But if you want to be a better conversationalist, you've got to learn the discipline of listening more. And if you're a natural listener, you've got to learn to be willing to talk to people. And the best way to do that is to listen to their stories and understand what they mean by them, even when they don't know how to say it. And to learn to craft stories that are relevant to the people that you're talking to. You master those 2 skills, you are way further down the road than you could possibly imagine to becoming a leader. If you're already a leader, You lead an organization, you lead a nonprofit, you're just trying to lead your family better. There's nothing you could do to advance your leadership better than learning to connect with people in conversation. Communication skills, public speaking skills, all of those are incredible and necessary. But if you really want to take those to the next level, don't just be good on stage. Be good in a conversation. A conversation like a podcast interview, a media interview, a new potential hire or a new potential client, a new potential merger and acquisition, a relationship with members on your board. These are not lectures. These are not just public speaking. This is not craft your best speech and hope for the best results. This is a conversation. It's a give and take. It's a listen and respond. And that is best done through intentional story crafting and the ability to deconstruct somebody else's story. And that's what you'll learn at Story Power. I challenge you, get involved. The next 6 weeks course starts in April. The retreat starts in June. You can do both. In fact, if you sign up for the retreat, I'll give you the 6 weeks course for free just so you're ready at the retreat. I can't make a much better offer than that. I'm J. Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, or Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day. There is a retreat coming up that I want you to know about. It's called the Story Power Academy Retreat. This Story Power Retreat is about focusing on your communication skills, taking them to the next level. Discover, develop, draft, deploy, and deliver some of the best stories you've ever learned. You're going to listen, create, connect, relax, and reflect around this beautiful lake scene in Granbury, Texas. It's a chance to rejuvenate and refresh and start over with some of the best training you can possibly imagine around storytelling, leadership, and communication. Join us, get away, and relax.
Subscribe now for access to our extensive media library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. Begin your personal growth plan at storypoweracademy.com for leadership.